I want to thank the people. Boy, things got messed up a little when I moved it over. It was very aesthetically aligned when I had it, who helped me out, particularly Larry Hedges, who was the co-PI. And who participates in after school? Well, mostly kids in elementary school, right? A good number of kids in middle school, but then enrollment really drops off when you get to high school. Now, After School Matters, which conveniently for me is located in Chicago, is probably considered the flagship program for high school kids in the country. And I think if you look at that second line, you can see two reasons why that might be so. The first one is there are a lot of high school kids who are part of it. 7,000 kids each semester, 300 plus apprenticeships in dozens of high schools. That's a lot of people. So that's reason one. The second reason has to do with that word apprenticeships, something to do with its motto. Apprenticeships is a word from the world of work, right? And I think one of the ways to get high school kids involved in after-school program is to give them some introduction to job and career-related skills. And that's what After School Matters does. They get paid a stipend, which is roughly $5 an hour for participating, at least when times are good financially for the program. And they're engaged in project-based learning, which leads to a final product or performance. So let me give you two examples. There are a wide range of apprenticeships. A technology one, they have to build a website. And they have to pick something that they would like to sell, that they have a personal interest in selling. So it could be athletic shoes or jewelry or cars, and they have to make a website that is both functional, like has a shopping cart that works and is attractive. For an arts, there was one apprenticeship that was on West African dance. And at the end of the semester, they had to give a public performance of the dance numbers that they had learned. Okay. The instructors are not teachers for the most part. They're generally people who make their living practicing that trade or craft in the community. It's about 9 hours a week for 10 weeks in the fall and 10 weeks in the spring. They can switch after a semester into another apprenticeship if they want. Not in our study they couldn't do that, but in general they can. And we did a randomized control trial with a lot of quantitative data and a lot of qualitative data. And the question was, does ASM, After School Matters, work when it is implemented well? Which is to say, we purposefully chose among the better apprenticeships and wanted to see, would the model work when presumably there'd be less variation in implementation? Now that limits our ability to generalize to the typical ASM apprenticeship, but we thought this would be a first step and give the program its best shot at proving its effectiveness. Random assignment at the level of the individual. The instructors would set up a table in the hallway typically at the beginning of the semester and do a dog and pony show, and kids would sign up for a specific apprenticeship. And then the kids who signed up would be assigned by the research team randomly to either that apprenticeship or a control group. 13 apprenticeships spread over 10 schools, over 500 kids. As you can see, they're almost all minority and low income. For the most part, we tried to get measures before everything started in the fall and when things ended in the spring. Now, the control group is interesting. Control group, they basically say business as usual, but we made an effort to see what were the kids doing in the control group. Well, they weren't just doing nothing. We had been told that, if After School Matters is in here, they're not going to be doing anything, but in fact 91% of them were involved in some alternative activity. So basically we're comparing After School Matters not to not doing after school, but is the After School Matters brand better than what they could otherwise obtain in the community? Positive youth development. We have 5 variables: self-efficacy, self-regulation, occupational values, whether they experience trust and caring in relation to adults, and skills in working with others. After School Matters' top 2 goals were positive youth development and marketable job skills. So marketable job skills, what happened is I developed a mock job interview in collaboration with some senior human resource professionals. And all of the interviews were administered by HR professionals because that's what they do for a living. They're the pros in that. And I thought any findings that come out would have a lot more credibility in the business and policy world if they were administered by HR people rather than our grad students. And we had 28 of them over the course of 3 years who volunteered their time pro bono. Academic performance, the usual variables, and problem behavior, we took a measure from the Ad Health Survey. Okay, here are the results. There's good and bad. For positive youth development, only one of the 5 variables was there a significant difference between the group. This favored after-school matters, but what happened? It was a preventive effect. Both groups declined in self-efficacy over the course of the year, but the decline was not as steep for the after-school matters group. Okay. Marketable job skills, nothing, not even close. Academic performance, nothing. But, little hope. Problem behavior, there was a significant effect that was in ASM's favor. Again, this was a preventive effect. There wasn't a lot, and mostly it was on items about selling drugs and being involved in gangs. Now, there weren't very many kids who reported selling drugs or being involved in gangs, but over the course of a year, the number grew slightly, but it grew less in after-school matters than it did in the control group, so it was a preventive impact. Okay. There we go. So we did add a number of qualitative follow-up studies to try to understand and extend those quantitative findings. We had over 2,400 pages of field notes because we had observed one session a week in each of the apprenticeships, and we had up to 50-page case studies of each of the apprenticeships. So we had a lot of qualitative data. And I focused on marketable job skills as to follow up that domain for 2 reasons. First, that was a really meaningful societal outcome, and I want you to keep that term in mind as I go through, because really what we're looking at is minority youth unemployment, and could something be done about that? Right now, the unemployment rate for black youth is around 25%. Just a few years ago, it was in the 30s. It's a big problem. It's been that way for a long time. So if there's any way we can address it, that's really an important social outcome. And I also addressed it because marketable job skills, we're talking about observable public behavior, both verbal and nonverbal. And it's a lot easier to figure out what's going to lead to a good outcome than self-efficacy, which involves a lot of internal processes that we have modest access to. So we did 3 main ones, and I can't talk about the first 2 because I don't have enough time. I'd have the 0 minutes in front of me right away. First, we compared the 2 best apprenticeships in terms of their hiring rate versus their controls to the 2 worst apprenticeships in terms of their hiring rate, and whether there's some differences among the 2 best versus the 2 worst, which suggests how it could really, what was accounting for hiring differences. And we did find some interesting outcomes, but it's too complex to talk about in 10 minutes. I thought I'd be able to talk about the next one, where we took 2 of the best ones that had competing models. One which is a favorite of developmental psychologists, which would be a authoritative relationship model, and one which would be a favorite of economics, which would be competition, where teams within an apprenticeship competed against each other. And we tried to figure out in the 11 remaining apprenticeships, could we implement those models with the apprenticeship and the instructors we had. And we thought basically that we couldn't do the authoritative one because it was too difficult, and 2/3 of the people wouldn't be able to do it, whereas 2/3 of the people would be able to do the competition one. So I'm just going to give you that thing. And what I'm going to talk about now is when we systematically debriefed the human resource interviewers after they did it and asked them, well, what makes a kid employable? Why was this kid employable and this wasn't? And they really opened up a lot. And they suggested a variety of factors that led organically to some new program and evaluation, which I will talk about at the end. So the first question, do youth know what counts as work experience? So like this ad, like you need 6 months experience. What do they mean by that? Well, some of the youth did know, but a lot of them didn't. And I'm going to give you an example, a quote from an HR interview. One of the jobs they could apply for was a fictional group that we called Chicago Cool Clothes, okay? And here's what she said. For the cool clothes job, part of the job description was setting out displays. And I said, have you ever had to do a poster board for a presentation in class? They said, yeah. I said, so that's designing and marketing. Your poster board would be the same or similar skills to setting up a display of merchandise. And they were like, oh. So they don't think about the thing that they've done. When they hear the word experience, they think work experience or job experience. And so I was getting a lot of, I don't have any experience. So in other words, you don't have to have experience at a paid job for it to count. The second one was, were they able to successfully communicate their skills and experience? What the HR people told us, and this is really important, is that a lot of these kids, and these are mostly freshmen and sophomore from some of the poorest neighborhoods in Chicago, and they were not great schools either. They were all neighborhood schools. They said a lot of these kids have experiences and skills that employers would really value, but they don't know it, and they don't know how to communicate it in the interview. And what the interviewers were they kept telling me they wanted elaborated answers. So I can contrast them to two presentations yesterday. Reed asked us about certain dilemmas, yes or no, would we do it? That's not what they wanted to hear. They didn't want a simple one-word answer. They wanted what the keynote speaker talked about when he was interviewing people for his program in Harlem. They wanted to talk about, why do you want to do that? What were your options? Why did you choose that? How did it go? What were the outcomes? What did you learn from it? They wanted to elaborate because they wanted to understand how the young person thought and what their thinking process was and the skills they demonstrated in that, and then they would know whether or not they were hireable. There was a lot of focus on soft skills. Soft skills are things that are generic to pretty much every job, communication, problem solving, and so on. Hard skills are something particular to an occupation like repairing computer hard drives. They said most employers, if they have hard skills you need to learn, they want to train you their way and how to do it. So they weren't looking for that. They were looking for kids with good soft skills. Okay, so what happened is the Chicago public school system had one of their periodic turnovers of all their top administrators, and I had a very good in with the new group. And they asked me, when they heard about these findings, could I develop a program to teach young people in high school how to interview well for jobs. So I said, okay, let's give it a go. I met with my top human resource people from the After School Matters intervention to really go over in real detail what they were looking for and how they wanted the kids to talk. And then I operationalized it in terms of, because some of their concepts were high-flung, how you could present it to a 16 or 17-year-old, okay? They originally asked us to give the intervention, but we thought that would never be scaled up, so we had teachers do it. We picked teachers in career and technical education because we were told they had a new leader who really wanted to try new things. So we thought that would be the best way to do it. And we obviously were concerned with motivation and so on. There were a lot of structured exercises. We taught them how to give elaborated answers without doing it by following a simple kind of rubric that we developed that was perfectly understandable. There was a lot of experiential learning and role playing. They basically role play different parts of the mock job interview in different sessions. Their teacher played the interviewer, and that was fun for the teacher and the students. Fellow students gave a lot of good examples that they hadn't thought of that they could use. And they also did some written work and so on. And there were a lot of misconceptions we found in doing this intervention about what they thought should be done. For example, you're always supposed to ask questions of the interviewer at the end. And the HR people said it was really essential because they want to see that you're interested in learning and that you found out a little bit or thought about the company. But the young people, many of them, not all of them, said that would be disrespectful and rude if we did that, because we're assuming that the interviewer is competent and smart, and if they would tell us everything we needed to know of the interview, and if we asked a question, we're suggesting that they weren't doing their job. So they didn't want to be disrespectful, so they wouldn't ask questions. And there were a lot of other misconceptions like that. 6 sessions in class, 6 40-minute sessions, 5 classrooms. These are pre-post, again, mock job interviews. A different interviewer did it pre and a different interviewer did it post. And we doubled the hiring rate basically from 27 to 53%. All of our measures were rated on 1 to 5 scale, so the continuous variable is a 1 to 5 scale, and the dichotomous is simple yes, no, whether they were hired or not. So that's a pretty decent effect size. When we looked at videos of the same question, how the young person answered it before and after the training, we were really struck by that. They seemed so much more comfortable talking to adults. They were much more focused in their answers. They used much better examples, and they just seem more mature. And it's really striking if you've been a parent to a teenager, you think you can get that kind of benefit in 2 weeks. I mean, everybody would sign up, really. There was no control group for this. This is very exploratory work. So we think the mock job interview could be considered a hard outcome, okay? And this is something I think is really very much needed in after-school positive youth development world. I think it's really relatively similar to high school graduation, even when there are strict standards for what counts as high school graduation. Rich Lerner and I, when we graduated high school, we had to take hard statewide exams to pass that. Right, Rich? The HR people are really judges and the gatekeepers as to whether youth are qualified to make the transition to the world of work. So it's asking some professionals in the field, in the business world, or saying, are these young people qualified? So if they say yes, I think that's pretty much a hard outcome. It's just as good as high school graduation, I think. So then the question becomes, what programs best prepare youth to achieve this outcome? And then I have this really funny slide. The arrows are going backwards. Can you look at that? This is what's called a backward mapping approach, which has sort of been developed by Richard Elmore, who's on the ed school faculty at Harvard. And what he's concerned about, when a lot of programs are implemented, there's not a strong focus on the outcome. And we have, in the positive youth development world, a lot of murky outcomes, and it's hard to have a tight focus on them. Hiring is a not so murky outcome. And so you focus on that, and then you go backward. And you say, what is the intervention most proximate to the outcome that is most likely to achieve that outcome? And in this case, I would say it's training job interview skills, which I already talked a tiny bit about. We back up one more step and say, what program best prepares young people, is the best foundation to take advantage of a job interview program. And that, I think, is a job program that has two things. One, where the young people have attained a certain comfort level in talking to adults about work-related issues. Okay, there's give and take about work. Why are you doing this? What else could be done? There's give and back and forth about feedback and questioning things. They get used to talking with an adult who's an authority figure and about work-related issues, so they're then best prepared to take advantage of the more technical job interview talk. And two, where they learn some skills that lead to some accomplishments, okay? Because that's what the interviewers are going to talk about. What did you accomplish? And if it didn't lead to a positive outcome, what did you learn from it? Okay? That's always the option. If it didn't work out, what did you learn from it? So what I did is I'm here combining a randomized control design with a lot of qualitative data as well. There were mixed findings about after-school matters, and you could look at it in both an optimistic or a pessimistic way. There are arguments for both. The mock job interview, particularly when using human resource interviewers as a hard outcome, hard and soft skills. And I think what positive youth development programs can do when they're run well is they can teach young people soft skills, and we've seen those soft skills can lead to better hiring rates, particularly can improve that rate of minority youth unemployment. So that's a real justification for that in terms of hard outcomes that those are meaningful societal outcomes. Okay, and use this backward mapping approach to program design. And if you want the full story, it's going to be a book coming out sometime in 2015. Thank you.